What's the most horrific act committed by someone you know personally? NSFW. Worked with a guy who got done for manslaughter. He bashed someone's head in with a table in a pub. This was after he stabbed a guy in the chest with darts. This was over a darts game. He also served time for beating a policeman into a coma with the policeman's own truncheon after the policeman caught him breaking into a car. That whole event sounds oddly British for some reason. Very. He was from Beswick, which is basically Sports City in Manchester. A former coworker murdered his friend when the friend agreed to work with the police to bring down my coworker for stealing a shipment of human growth hormone. Apparently it was a vicious murder. They burned the body. Ike. But it's been a while. My coworker ended up being on the run for many years and was eventually turned in after his story ran on America's Most Wanted. His fiancée saw it and he confessed who he was to her. She waited until he was asleep and went to a payphone to turn him in. What was he planning on doing with all that growth hormone? Growing. Good damn it. Guy I considered a close personal friend hunted down his ex, shot her with a rifle, and then turned the gun on himself. Neighbors reported hearing him say, "You knew this was going to happen." This just goes to show how difficult it is to spot an abuser in the wild. Honestly, I'm not surprised, sadly. Not saying op is this way, but my ex stalked me for months after I broke up with him. Even came in my house twice unannounced, uninvited, when I was sleeping / at work, and threatened suicide. I thought for a while that he was going to come hurt me and then hurt himself, but our mutual friends looked the other way because he was a nice guy that was just going through a hard time. Mind you, I broke up with him because he cheated on me for the last time, and I had finally saw an opportunity to leave without being stuck with sharing an apartment or car with him. Sometimes people just don't want to believe that the nice guy can also be dangerous. I had an acquaintance who owned a iron working shop. Some employee of his thought he was fabulously wealthy because he was well off. The dirtball employee went to their house and tortured 4 of them to death to get their fabulous wealth. $40. 000. Unfortunately, the housekeeper was there as well, and they tortured her too. The junkies ordered pizza and left their DNA to be found. Burned the house. Really very sad. This guy was known to hire guys who had criminal records and give them a second chance. His son was 10 years old. I remember when this case was all over the news. I think the shop owner had 2 older daughters that survived because they were away at school. I only met him once as a kid, but my granddad's brother-in-law. He approached me and my mum in a cafe. I was 8 and tried starting normal conversational small talk. My mum panicked and asked him what the hell he was doing out of prison. He brushed her question off and he knelt down to talk to me, which made my mum pick me up, sling me over her shoulder, and run back to the car. I just remember being so scared by her sudden moves I quietly burst into tears in the car, and we drove halfway home. Mum then stopped in a supermarket car park, got in the back, unbuckled me, and we cuddled in the back for what felt like days, most likely an hour tops, whilst we both cried. I had no clue what was happening, but mum calmed me down, and she kept saying, "You're safe. I love you," over and over. I found out years later he slit my granddad's sister, his wife's, throat and brutally beat her to death. Hence my mum's fear. You sound like you have a good mom. His mom is a real life superhero. Guy I went to school with was real calm, very smart, and everyone loved him. He was a gentle person from what I remember. He had lost his mom a couple years before this. She was a nurse, and they found her dead in a hospital room during her shift. Unknown causes. Our senior year of high school. Dude is a championship wrestler, dominating his grades, and just doing good. He lived with his dad who was a police officer for years and years. At lunch one day he left school and came back. Everything was normal and the day was finished out. His dad did not show up for work that evening, and the police sent someone to go knock on his door. They found the house ransacked, and his dad lying in bed with a single gunshot wound to the head, deceased. Later that night they called my grandmother in for questioning, because she cleaned their house once a week. Not much later than that, the guy I went to school with broke down and confessed he had come home on lunch to ask for money, and he and his dad got in an argument. His dad laid down like normal for his shift, and he took his dad's service pistol and shot him. And after realizing what he'd done, he'd freaked out and turned the house upside down to make it look like a robbery. Then went and finished the day at school to try to make it seem like he had no clue what had happened. Shocked everyone. What happened to him? They charged him with first-degree murder and also murdering an officer because his dad was supposed to be on shift when they found him. Burn a baby alive. The story: I knew someone at a music school. She then left, and one day she showed up at the school again because she was stopping music and wanted to sell her instrument. She told me she was living in an isolated community in the middle of the mountains and looked so happy and radiant that I felt jealous. A couple of months later I turned the TV on and there she was. The community was actually a sect commanded by a guy who claimed to be the reincarnation of Jesus. He had impregnated a woman from the sect and said the baby was the Antichrist and had to die. They burned the baby alive when he was only 2 days old. Jesus F Christ. Apparently it wasn't him. r/angry upvote. Her 2-year-old daughter drowned under suspicious circumstances. Nothing could be proved. About 3 years or so later, she had another kid, also drowned under suspicious circumstances. She was investigated but found nothing. Attributed to shitty coincidence. Couple more years later, she had a third kid with her man. Father came home early to find that she wasn't in the house, but his son was left alone in the bathtub. He was dead by that point. She got slapped with 3 murder charges and life. WTF. Why would someone do that? Just don't have more kids. My father beat the s out of my mother and myself when I was a toddler. I have an uneven skull because of it. Until I found out. I thought it was a birth defect. I didn't find this out from my mother until I was an adult when I had to take him to court because he had opened numerous credit cards with my social security number when I was a kid and had tanked my credit by the time I was 18. What a ref piece of s. Pretty much sums him up fairly, I reckon. When I was a kid I was in the hospital for some surgery. In the next bed over was a kid who was younger than me in a full body cast. Turns out his dad was drunk and ran over him with the car. But that's not the worst part. His dad, apparently a hopeless alcoholic, later committed suicide. But that's not the worst part. A few years ago, I decided to look for the kid on the internet and see how he was doing. Turns out, he killed his wife with a chainsaw and then killed himself with a chainsaw. https://www.philadelphia.com/news/national international/husband killed estranged wife with chainsaw used machine to take own life coroner/97,883/ But that's not the worst part. Their 14-year-old son found them. That would F you up for life. A guy I knew killed his father in front of his mother and younger brother trying to protect his mum from severe abuse. After he served his sentence, the family accepted him back, and they've been living a normal life to this day. That started off really messed up, but turned into something completely understandable. Glad they accepted him back. I can understand 100% how this kind of thing can happen. My mom and dad had a rocky relationship. My mom grew up in hell, and she wanted her life a certain way. And my dad grew up believing that family should like father knows best, despite his reality being a completely absurd opposite to that show. They had both suffered horrible abuse as children and started their adult lives as teenagers. Both married, got their own place, and were both remarried by 20/21 to each other. Just an example of what was normal to my dad. One time we were in a garage at my grandpa's working on a car. My brother and I were useless, but he wanted us to learn. My dad had been trying to stay sober for a few months and wasn't going around anyone who used other than his own father. His dad had a lug wrench in his hand. Asked my dad to run down to Bob's real quick and get me some of them things. My dad, who was instructed to call his dad by his first name, only said, "David, I'm trying to keep my family together and do the right thing. I really don't want to be around those." Before he even finished the sentence, my grandpa had him on the ground beating him with that lug wrench. My dad could have killed him easily. He was bigger than him, meaner than him, and stronger than him. He stood up, and my grandpa pointed down the road. My dad said, I'm sorry David. I'm going now. My mom lost her mother when she was only 4. Her mom took her own life with a pistol. After that she never had a stable home and spent her entire childhood experiencing horrible abuse. Well, anyway, my mom had just had a hysterectomy and was laying in bed recovering. My dad came home from work and she demanded he let her check his breath for alcohol. He refused and a heated argument ensued. She threw something at him and he grabbed a hold of the foot of the bed screaming at her and shaking it. I saw her wailing in pain and blood started soaking through her shirt where she had been stapled up. I looked down and see a big metal Macute case. Grabbed it by the handle and swung with all my might. My dad was my intended target, but my mom raised up in the bed about that time and I struck her in the head. He screamed, "Look what you did to your mom." I noticed a screwdriver sitting on the nightstand, grabbed it and ran at him. I stabbed him probably 10 to 15 times with that dull thing before he managed to get me down and take it from me. I managed to break the skin through his clothes only a few times, but I think about how much different my life would be if it had been a knife or a gun laying there. As a young man I hated my parents for all of that. As an adult I know that those two did everything they could and never had the resources to be better. They divorced after multiple separations when I was 15. But they really did stick by each other until right before my dad died. My mom remarried after many years. After my ex and I separated I moved back in with my mom temporarily 15 years later and the old man was still there looking out for her, keeping her fire, working on the property and keeping things up. They finally learned to regulate their emotions for the most part and didn't have an incident once in all of that time. It probably helped that they never felt obligated to the other romantically after that. They stayed close as friends, helped each other with my sister's kids, and when my mom couldn't deal with something he was doing she'd just tell him to get lost for a couple weeks. Until my mom started seeing her husband he was always there. I'm sure he was upset about it, but he didn't really express it. My mom made her position clear and he dated a few women here and there and would disappear when he did. It was a strange setup, that's for sure. They were two terribly neglected and abused children who found each other very early in life and had no idea how to handle the challenges of a family until they experienced it for themselves. They were great with the grandkids. My dad ultimately couldn't stay sober long enough for my mom to get romantic with him again and that's usually why she'd run him off. They definitely loved each other and they definitely tried. Life ain't easy. Edit. Bad math. I'm dumb. P. That feels like my grandparents. My grandma literally went and disappeared herself for 3 years in the late 60s. My grandpa and the kids didn't know where she was, nor did her family. She cold been dead. My grandpa was abusive to her, neglectful and abusive to his children, left them in the care of abusers who didn't feed them, and he didn't feed them either when he had them during those years. When my grandma returned, they split up the kids. My grandpa remarried, while my grandma had various boyfriends over the years. But by the time they got old, they pretty much did what your parents did. It was to the point to where my grandpa's wife, who is still alive, loved my grandma, came over and would sit in the car while he would mow my grandma's lawn or do ex work, until my grandma told her to come inside and said she hadn't wanted him back in years. A friend I grew up with got a job in a care home for vulnerable children and teens. Mostly kids with severe learning difficulties / mental health issues / brain damage etc. He was in his mid-20s and was caught having sex in the care home with a 14-year-old girl. Not only was she 14, she also had learning difficulties, so severe there was no way she would have been able to consent. He raped her. He got 4 years. Served about 3. He's out now but no one has seen him since. I assume he moved away to prevent getting his head kicked in. Nasty bastard. He was always a bit weird, but no idea he was capable of something like that. Someone I was close friends with till college was raping his wife's daughters from her first marriage for years. He was also filming it and distributed the material and was teaching other pedos internet security and how to use the dark web. A laptop involved in a sting in the UK undid all his careful trail covering. The investigation revealed over a decade of traceable data of his activities building a CP criminal network. I don't like to think about it. My mother tried to kill my father when I was a toddler by taping up the windows in our apartment. She turned on the gas at the stove, took me and left. She knew my dad would light a cigarette upon returning home. She was banking on it. Luckily my dad was able to smell the gas leaking under the door. Did she get the idea from The Simpsons? One of the early Sideshow Bob episodes has him attempting almost the same thing. Good thing Wiggum and the boys weren't around to celebrate a job well done. Big back quote Emma way. Toys, what did you say, Chief? I don't know how to quantify this among all the horrific things I've seen in this thread, but I've wanted to get it off my chest for a long time and I've never been able to tell anyone because it's not my story to tell. When my mom was 6 years old, she was molested by a neighbor. She told her mom. Nothing happened to the neighbor. That's all I know for sure. My mom was very vague about the details, but based on what I know happened and the timing of it all, I believe her mom blamed her and threatened to harm her if her father took any action. Her father left, which was a long time coming anyway, with good intentions, but ultimately left her alone in a dangerous situation. Her mom brainwashed her over several years into believing she had done something wrong. So when she was finally allowed to seek help as a teenager, the pastor at their church, never a mental health professional, she couldn't argue when her mom told the pastor that she was a wretch who tempted men for fun. She was never allowed to be alone with men as a child because she might do something to cause them to rape her. Ultimately she was kicked out at 17 when her mom found out she was sexually active. This forced her into a very dangerous living situation. I was born 2 years later. I always hated my grandmother and refused to see her whenever I had a say. When I was old enough, I cut her off entirely. She showed up at my grad party and I left. This was all before I knew what she did to my mom. Sometimes you can just smell the evil rolling off someone. My mom tried patching things up with her last year and now constantly complains to me that her boundaries aren't being respected. It's infuriating, but it's a journey. So I went on Reddit, I guess. One of my childhood friends was diagnosed as schizophrenic in his early 20s. Went off his meds for a bit of time and had an episode. Bludgeoned his mom to death, who was my parents' friend. They found him in a fetal position crying and not understanding what happened. He committed suicide a few years later while in jail. That's so awful for everybody involved. Imagine your brain just suddenly turning on you and becoming your enemy.